For an entire generation, Ollie McGraw was the face of romantic heartbreak long before she ever experienced it for real. As Jenny Cavallari in Love Story, she taught moviegoers that the deepest pain can hide behind the gentlest smile. What almost no one realized at the time was that the actress on screen was already living a script far more complicated than the one she was handed. One written by a turbulent childhood, a string of marriages, and a romance with the most dangerous man in Hollywood. Ollie McGraw was born Elizabeth Alice McGraw in 1939 in Pound Ridge, New York, to two artists, Richard and Frances McGraw. On paper, it sounds like an idyllic, creative upbringing. In reality, McGraw has described her father as a frightened, often furious man, shaped by an orphaned, abandoned childhood of his own, and she has openly called him violent in interviews about her early years. Her mother, meanwhile, was distant and intellectually formidable but emotionally guarded. It was a home filled with talent and tension in equal measure, and young Ollie grew up learning to read a room for danger long before she ever stepped onto a film set. She found structure at Rosemary Hall and later Wellesley College, and after graduating, she drifted into the orbit of New York fashion, working for 6 years as an assistant to the legendary editor Diana Vreeland at Harper's Bazaar. A brief, early marriage to a banker named Robin Hone came and went within a couple of years, barely a footnote compared to what was still to come. Interestingly, when McGraw became famous enough to land a cover story in Time magazine, she allowed the press to print a softer, more glamorous version of her upbringing than the one she had actually lived. It would take her until her 1991 memoir to go back and correct the record, admitting that the childhood she had once mythologized for the cameras was nothing like the truth. By the late 1960s, McGraw had transitioned from styling other people's photo shoots to standing in front of the camera herself, and Hollywood took notice almost immediately. Her first major film role, 1969's Goodbye, Columbus, won her a Golden Globe and the attention of Paramount's head of production, Robert Evans. The two married that same year, and Evans cast her in Love Story, a film few expected to become a cultural earthquake. Released in 1970, it became one of the highest-grossing movies of its era, earned McGraw an Academy Award nomination, and made her, for a moment, the most recognizable young actress in America. In 1971, she and Evans welcomed a son, Josh. By 1972, after appearing in only 3 films, McGraw had been voted the top female box office star in the world and was invited to press her hands and feet into the cement outside Grauman's Chinese Theater, a level of stardom most actresses never reach in a lifetime, let alone 2 years into a career. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale, a brilliant career, a powerful husband, new motherhood. McGraw herself later admitted the picture was more complicated than it appeared. In 1972, Evans helped secure McGraw a role that would unravel that fairy tale entirely. The female lead in The Getaway, a Sam Peckinpah thriller starring Steve McQueen. McGraw later wrote in her 1991 memoir, Moving Pictures, that her hesitation about taking the part wasn't really about leaving her toddler at home. I knew I was going to get in some serious trouble with Steve, she confessed. She was right. McQueen, 12 years older and already crowned the king of cool, carried himself with the swagger of a man who'd clawed his way up from an abandoned, institutionalized childhood into total stardom. His screen image, fast cars, faster motorcycles, a permanent air of barely contained menace, wasn't really an act. It was close to who he was off camera too, which made him both thrilling and unpredictable to be around. On the Texas set, the pull between them was immediate and, by all accounts, impossible to resist. Within months, McGraw had filed for divorce from Evans, a betrayal that stunned Hollywood and was dramatized decades later in the Paramount Plus series The Offer. In July 1973, she married McQueen. The wedding had all the glamour the tabloids wanted, but the terms behind it were anything but romantic. McQueen insisted McGraw sign a prenuptial agreement waiving any claim to his fortune in a divorce, and he made it clear he expected his wife to stop acting altogether. At the height of her fame, she agreed, driven less by ambition than by fear of losing him. She later described, with brutal honesty, exactly what that surrender looked like day to day. I played cook, cleaning lady, simple woman to the hilt. In their secluded Malibu beach house, the early days had a deceptive calm. Barbecues, long walks on the sand, a tight little circle of friends. MacGraw was now also stepmother to McQueen's 2 teenage children from his first marriage to actress Neil Adams, Terry and Chad, another adjustment layered on top of an already complicated household. But McQueen's charm masked old wounds. Abandoned by his father and shuffled off by his mother as a boy, he grew into a man who trusted almost no one, least of all the people closest to him. That distrust curdled into possessiveness. MacGraw has said his jealousy could flare over nothing at all, even as he carried on his own well-rumored affairs. The isolation of giving up her career, paired with his volatility, began to wear her down. Both of them, by their own later admissions, started drinking more heavily as the marriage strained. McQueen leaning further into alcohol and drugs, MacGraw quietly developing a dependency of her own that she wouldn't fully confront for years. By the mid-1970s, suspicion had replaced intimacy in the MC household. Rumors of his infidelities circulated through Hollywood, and MacGraw, by her own account, eventually sought comfort outside the marriage as well, caught in a cycle of hurt and retaliation neither of them seemed able to break. The breaking point came in 1977, when MacGraw told McQueen she wanted to go back to work. According to biographer Mark Elliott, his response was immediate and final. In that case, we are filing for divorce. She took the role anyway, in Peckinpah's Convoy, and though the couple briefly tried to patch things together, the trust was gone. Their divorce was finalized in 1978, closing a 5-year marriage defined as much by control as by the chemistry that had once made it irresistible. Tragedy followed quickly. In 1980, just 2 years after the divorce, McQueen died at 50 from pleural mesothelioma, a rare cancer linked to asbestos exposure he'd likely encountered years earlier through his work and his love of racing. MacGraw's grief was complicated, tangled up with the anger and disappointment that remained, yet unmistakably real. Decades later, she would say simply, "I wish we had both grown old sober," a line that captures, more than any other, the regret she carried about everything addiction and pride had cost them both. The prenuptial agreement McQueen had insisted on meant MacGraw walked away from the marriage with essentially nothing financially, despite having given up her own career at his request. Years later, she would describe him in interviews as a strange, magnetic mix of anger, darkness, mystery, and a kind of childlike vulnerability she never stopped finding compelling, even after everything the marriage had cost her. MacGraw tried to pick her career back up through the late 1970s and early 1980s, with roles in Convoy, Players, Just Tell Me What You Want, and the sprawling miniseries The Winds of War. A 14-episode run on Dynasty in 1984 brought her back to television audiences, though the part did little to recapture her earlier stardom. Hollywood, by then, had largely moved on, and MacGraw herself later admitted the role hadn't done her any favors. Underneath the surface, her drinking had quietly become unmanageable. In 1986, with the encouragement of a friend, she checked into the Betty Ford Center, certain she only needed what she called a tune-up. What she found instead, by her own description, was a genuinely life-saving reckoning with addiction, with the men she had repeatedly built her identity around, and with the childhood that had shaped all of it. 5 years of sobriety later, in 1991, she published Moving Pictures, an autobiography, an unflinching account of fame, addiction, and the cost of disappearing into other people's expectations. The book became a bestseller precisely because it refused to flatter her own image, and it gave countless readers a mirror for their own struggles with love and dependency. In 1994, after fire destroyed her Malibu home, MacGraw relocated permanently to Tesuque, just outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. There she built a life almost unrecognizable from her Hollywood years, painting, practicing yoga, gardening, and devoting herself to animal welfare work with organizations including PETA and Animals Asia. She never remarried, choosing instead a kind of independence she'd never been allowed during her marriages. She has now maintained her sobriety for most of the past 4 decades, a fact she's called one of the proudest achievements of her life, far outweighing any award or box office record from her acting years.